Hello there, everybody. It is your boy Pred here. And yes, once again, I am inflicting yet another tier list onto all of you. Because I hate myself. Well, no, I do hate myself. I was going to say, but I hate you guys more, but no, I like you guys. But, you know, content and everything and all that, just, yeah. But, yes, I know tier lists are always the lazy man's way of generating content, but bear with me here for a second. So once again, it's another tier list, but you may look at all these cars and are like, "Oh Christ alive, Pred, not another car list. Haven't you learned from last time? What? How many times must we teach you this lesson, old man?" Um, but I do like making but I do like talking about cars quite a bit, as you can probably tell. I wish I could move this into an automotive channel where I could just talk about cars, but then that would be a betrayal. Maybe I can do like a second channel that just has me do car stuff, but I don't want to spread myself too thin. Let me know what you guys think. Anyways, um, so yeah, that's it. This is another tier list. Once again, talking about good old fashioned cars, this time talking about Mercedes-Benz. Ah, yes, we are doing something very German, yeah? Talking about probably the greatest car company in the world, as we know. And if you disagree with us, you will end up in the cooler. um, there's two reasons why I wanted to do this. One, this is actually a very extensive tier list. That has a lot of cars in it, as you can probably tell. So kudos to whoever made this. If you're watching this, creator, props to you. You've done a very solid job. Two, I actually know quite a bit about Mercedes-Benz. I know if you meet me in real life, my interest in cars very much tends to lean more American stuff. Like that's where I know my know more knowledge. My main area of expertise is American cars. But I like luxury cars of all types, and when it comes to as a gentleman's, Mercedes Benz is actually the one that I know quite a lot about more than the others. So that's why I also decided to do this. And three, because fuck it, why not? That should kind of be like your I feel like that should be a modus operandi for some people. It's just fuck it, why not? um so as you can see, there's probably all the major you know, Mercedes-Benz cars here, models, as it were. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of um, tier rankings for this. This is a very comprehensive list, so hopefully it will seem to be better than me just saying a bunch of wishy-washy BS. Um, and because I actually have driven, decent amount of Mercedes-Benz cars in my time, I actually can, um, not super authoritatively, but at least lend some credence to the fact that I actually kind of do know what I'm talking about here. Um, Only thing, once again, and I know I say this every single time I do one of these, it's just my opinion, but you know how the internet is. It's a fickle, unpleasable little beast of an invention, and the people there are very fickle indeed. That's really all I can say right now. So without further ado, let's actually get into this list and let me not stall for time because I have a feeling this is going to be as long enough as it is, especially with me going off to tangents and stuff. Let's start off with the good old 300 SL going. Um, I mean, there's literally nothing I can say about the SL Gullwing that hasn't already been said. It's a fantastic Grand Tourer, probably one of the most revolutionary cars of all time, if not the most revolutionary car, arguably, gave birth to the term supercar. Many people say it's one of the first supercars ever. I kind of disagree with that dissertation. I guess it just depends on what your definition of supercar entails, but definitely was one of the most prestigious, highest end. GT cars of its days, performance cars of its day. There's really not a whole lot I can say about the 300 SL that other people who are smarter, more experienced, and much more coherent in their speech patterns have said that I can add to. I guess really the only flaw I can say about it is that it doesn't seem to be the most tall person friendly car on the planet. I think that's kind of why they made the 190 SL to begin with. It's like, for Hans, we have all these clients, but unfortunately they are far too tall to fit into the cabin. What shall we do? Why not just drop off the roof? Genius. So that's I think the only flaw is just that it's not the most tall person friendly car in the world. But otherwise there's really not much I can say. So yeah, it is certainly an S tier car for certain. Um Also, I'll try to be going through this. Some of these pictures are jumbled, but I'll do my best to kind of sort through all the wheat and the chaff and make sense of this. Um, Whether I succeed or not, really, that's kind of up to the world at large, I suppose. I don't really know. So now that we're on the subject of the 300 SL, let's move on. Just talking about the cars that spawned from it, the SL series of cars. Probably the greatest, s- if not the greatest, some of the greatest two door grand touring slash convertible cars of all time. So let's start off with the second generation, the W113. Um, SL series. This is the one that gave us the 280 SL Pagoda. Um, I'm kind of a bit lukewarm on this. I mean, this early style of Mercedes um design language, it's not my cup of tea in all honesty. Like I can respect what it is from an objective standpoint. I can certainly see why people admonish it and admire it even decades later because it is a very nicely styled thing, but it's just never been my cup of tea in all honesty. Um, Solid performance car, especially for this time with the 280 SL Pagoda. You had the big, well, big for its size, 2-point-liter inline six that made I want to say about 150 horsepower back in 1969, 1971, somewhere around there. So it's got the performance creds to back it up, but it's still a usable GT car. It's still, big trunk, um, a lot of space, somewhat comfortable and all that. And they keep going up in volume. I respect it for what it is. It's just never been something that I have personally been drawn to, but I'm not going to say it's bad. It's a good car. Um, Next up is its successor, the R107. I would argue this is probably the most iconic Mercedes-Benz SL generation besides the 300 SL. I mean, it ran a long, long time. It started in 1971 and didn't end production until 1989. You know, that's fucking 18 years on the same exact model platform. That gave it a healthy life. Um, and a lot of, but I will admit that towards the end of its life, it definitely was looking old in the tooth. You could tell this was a car made back in the early 70s, and it was starting to show and just how it drove and how it performed. I know Mercedes kept shoving in, the big 5 liter, 5.5 liter V8s to give it more performance, but it really was starting to get very, very old. Um, I don't really know how to feel about the R107. I respect its lineage. I still will admit, if you want to get into classic Mercedes ownership, the R107 is not at all a bad way to go because there's still a lot of aftermarket support. All the engine and transmission options are very reliable. Any problems that are there can easily be solved and fixed. They're very comfortable. They've got big trunks. They're tall people friendly. They're good. They can actually be good daily drivers if you understand the pitfalls of driving around in a 30, almost 35 plus year old car for the very, very newest examples of it. But the styling I've always been kind of iffy on. The now granted the Eurospec the versions that we got here in America with the big ugly black 5 mile per hour bumpers and like the 4 round headlights definitely does not contribute to that at all. They much like everything else that the US government does with regards to regulations, they managed to take a somewhat handsome if kind of sedate looking car and just made it look ugly as shit. But, considering that there are plenty of shops that will easily revert back to Eurospec with composite headlights and the steel bumpers and everything. Um, never good time like the present, I suppose. And in Euro form, it there are some angles I think it looks nice in. Others I'm kind of like, it's a bit boring. It looks a bit awkward. Definitely when it comes to color, I think this is very color dependent. I think red or maybe I don't know really about the color of it. I know there's this ugly hearing aid beige color that is used in the reference photo, which really doesn't lend credence to its design. Red, you kind of look like I guess the prototypical early 80s cougar, I would imagine. White makes you look like a drug dealer. Black actually kind of makes it look a bit boring in all honesty. I think you really have to find like the perfect right color for the design to pop and make you go, "Huh, that actually is very nice." Um so like the 113, respect the R107 for what it is. I just don't think it would be my cup of tea, but I can't deny the impact that it has had in popular culture throughout the automotive landscape. So for that, I am going to put it in gray tier. Just objectively speaking, personally, it's not my favorite, but I give it its due. Next up, and I'm just going to put these two in the same category. The R129. The successor of it, what some may consider the last good SL generation, and definitely I can sort of see why. They're very handsome cars. I honestly think they look just as good now as they did back in the day. This is one of those cars where you could probably put it in the showroom today with just modern amenities, and I think it'd still sell pretty well. This was the decade when Mercedes-Benz was still very much a no cost um, company when they hadn't cheapened out and kind of cheapened down by about 95 or so and still build cars to the best of their abilities, price tag be damned. And even when that was happening, the SL kind of avoided that for a lot of the time. I mean, it lived a long while. It was introduced in 1989. It didn't get discontinued until 2002. That's a very very long time to have ag- again to have a model like that. Again, it was starting to show its age towards the end of its run, but I think unlike the R107, it still feels modern enough to where you can use it as a daily driver, old pitfalls aside. And there's plenty of good engines for it. This was the last SL model to have the fabulous inline sixes in it. Then Mercedes switched over to V6s, and everything went terrible. Um, I personally believe that the two that if you're going to buy Mercedes Benz, you got to buy either a diesel or you got to buy V8 because those are the two engines that Mercedes Benz built their reputation on. Those are the two engines that tend not to have the most flaws to it as far as, what can go wrong as far as run I was going to say as far as running costs, it's a Mercedes. It's still going to cost you an arm and a leg even for a used model, but there's very little that could go wrong with either the diesel or V8 options, but the old inline 6 options were very solid as well. because inline sixes are just inherently the best six cylinder configuration, and I will fight anyone who says otherwise because they are intrinsically wrong on this point. Um, I think that the V6s, I really don't trust them. One, they don't make as much low end power as far as torque goes, which, me being me, low end power versus low end torque versus high end power. Low end torque should win every time. It is a roadster though. It's a two seater kind of GT sports car. I think so. I guess the high end power isn't as egregious, but I still feel like the inline six gives these types of cars a certain character to it that a V6 just can't match. I mean, V6s are for pedestrian um, family sedans, and really anytime a European manufacturer gets into a new engine configuration, it's always going to go tits up at some point. I do want to say that these early V6s had some teething issues to them. But that's just normal, Jaguar's initial V8 engines had plastic timing chain tensioner problems and water pump problems. BMW had the same thing with their V8s, and still continue to have the problems with their V8s because BMW can't build a V8 engine to save its life. But that's neither here nor there. Um, but as far as engine choices, it was also the last SL with a manual transmission option, which I think pairs really well with the V6. This was the first SL engine to give us, the big 6 liter V12 options, which I personally think is overkill. And again, it was Mercedes experimenting with V12 for God knows how long, and of course there's going to be teething issues, and it's going to be pricey to run. I personally don't think the SL 600s are worth it. An SL 500, hell, even an SL 420 is going to do you better. You're going to get the same performance out of the 5 liter V8 as you would from the V12 with cheaper running costs as far as maintenance and especially gas is concerned. It may not be as smooth as the V12 is, but it's still smooth enough. You're not gonna do anything. And you know what? This generation of SL is fairly reliable, surprisingly enough. It has its issues, like the power folding tops are notorious for being expensive money pits on these particular cars, just of how many hydraulic assembly pumps and wires and everything go into the folding retractable hardtop roof, which really makes them a pain in the ass, and trying to get one sorted out is going to be more than the car is worth in some cases, which is really sad. Probably why a lot of these ended up getting scrapped. um you do have on some of the models, you do have the infamous biodegradable wiring that Mercedes tried in the early 90s, where, the wiring harness just goes to shit after a couple years and you have to basically get it replaced, and it's not a very cheap way to go to. But once that's sorted out, it works flawlessly. But, stick with the V8s and the inline sixes. They're going to last you a million miles, and as long as you just keep on with basic maintenance with both of them, they're going to last you a long time. And they've aged really well for themselves. They're still very practical as far as daily drivers, despite being two-seaters. Again, big trunk, very comfortable. You know, they, you know, I haven't driven them myself, but I know a lot of people have said that they very much have that old school Mercedes feel that makes them drive really nice. So honestly, yeah, I think these are fantastic. So I'm definitely going to put both of them in the best list. And if you're wondering why there's two separate pictures, pre-facelift versus post-facelift, there's minor visual differences between the two, but I still think they both look fairly solid. Oh, not what I can say for the original R230 though. Uh, yes, the bad era of Benz is what we're going into at this point. Um, for those uninitiated, the bad era of Mercedes-Benz, a lot of people have more or less stated that the period of time between 1995 to 2005, Mercedes-Benz basically lost their way because they no longer could do the let's engineer the best car we can, cost be damned sort of approach, because that just wasn't working because a lot of their cars had the stigma of being very unobtainable and very over the top, and it just didn't seem as conscientious, I guess, of the new wave. So They were like, well, we have to do something in order to lower the cost, and they went way too far in the other direction. This is where you had the infamous biodegradable wiring, like I mentioned, where the wiring harness just gets completely destroyed and dry rotted after a couple years and needs to be replaced. This was the era where they switched over to water-based paint, so they had really bad issues with rust, especially on the cheaper models, where you had like literal. It was like 70s American domestic levels of bad in terms of rust proofing. It was terrible, which you don't expect on a car that costs as much as a Mercedes-Benz. You had expensive electronic failures, you had, you know, issues with the transmission that were sealed for life, which it's not sealed for life. No transmission is sealed for life. That caused a lot of headaches there. You had stuff like the ABC pump on the really high end models. That is, ooh, you don't even want to know about the can of worms with that. And everything just felt substantially less compared to the predecessors that it was. And I think the R230 is a big case of that, because I actually, not on my old job, but the job before that, when I was working for the car dealership, I actually picked up a 2004 SL550. So this model right here, this is the pre-facelift version, which I personally think has aged really ugly. I've never been a fan of the like four round headlight look that Mercedes adopted in like the mid 90s to early 2000s and kind of ran with. I, One, I just don't think they look very good, and also I just feel like there's something very off about it that doesn't seem traditionally Mercedes Benz to me. Maybe that's just me being pedantic. I don't know. But going back to it, I drove a 2004 SL550 version of this, and what really surprised me was just the lack of quality to it. I mean, these were not cheap cars back then. I mean, the SL550 cost $100,000, maybe more, six-figure car, and the interior was just absolutely falling apart. There were big blotchy marks where the paints had rubbed off or the leatherette had started to really wear down. There were, buttons were faded. The leather looked really worn and didn't hold up well to scrutiny. There were noticeable tears. It's awful. You go into a Mercedes showroom, you don't expect that sort of quality. I certainly wouldn't pay $100,000 for that sort of interior quality. um it just had this aura of cheapness to it, and it's a shame because dynamically the car is all right. I mean, it had like 140,000 miles on it, but that 5.5 liter V8 was still running like a top. It still ran like it came off the showroom. It didn't ride all that bad, especially considering it had really gaudy aftermarket wheels on it. They were like drug dealer wheels. They looked really terrible, but the ride still coped just fine. It had a satellite navigation, which was hopelessly outdated, but it still worked surprisingly enough. Transmission shifted fine. It felt confident, but there was just something about it, mainly because of how bad the interior was. And I don't think it felt dynamically all that exciting, to be honest. This was a bad, bad time period. And I know some people are going to say, well, what about the AMG versions of it? Okay, fine. If you slap an AMG badge, stiffen the suspension up, and put the massive bonkers AMG V8s or V12s under the hood, yes, it will suddenly come alive and become the sniveling madman and all this other stuff. But I've always been of the opinion that because I've always been of the opinion that Mercedes Benz very much is a very comfort luxury, is very much luxury in the traditional sense, where some of it is based around technology, but it's actually based around technology that works. Unlike just stick a giant iPad in the middle of the screen sort of technology that we're seeing today, or you know, oh, it has to handle like an E30 M3 or else it's garbage sort of thing, where it has to be sporty and go around the Nürburgring all the time. Mercedes, at least for a lot of their base models, still very much keeps to the good build quality, good interior, comfortable ride, effortless power sort of mentality that I like in luxury cars. But this SL just didn't deliver on that. So that's why I don't tend to count AMG versions, because yes, AMG versions are fun. They're mad lad cars, and I respect AMG for it, but they very much are against the ethos, I would say, of Mercedes Benz. And this SL just isn't yeah, it just didn't do it for me, in all honesty. I personally think this is like the absolute low point of the SL series. Just this era in general, the pre facelift R230s. There, and having driven one, I can confirm that outside of the engines still being solid and everything, they just don't cut the mustard. So yeah, I'm just gonna put them in boring. I'm sure if the AMG versions are different, but they this was the point where Mercedes did really lose its magic. But they kept on with the R230, and in about 2008, 2009, they gave it a very substantial facelift. Um, Finally, first of all, I think the facelift looks a lot better, and I think it's managed to age better as well. Second, they definitely upped the interior quality on these old cars. They definitely looked and felt a lot nicer inside. But they were still practical and still practical. Again, that's the great thing about SLs is that despite being two-seater cars, they have a lot of practicality to them, which is why they're so easy to day-to-day drive. They got rid of the old 5-speed and put a 7-speed 7G Tronic automatic in which I, I have my reservations about the 7G Tronic. Day-to-day driving it's smooth, it's fine, but sometimes it always feels like it hunts a gear, and if you put it in sport mode, it just has no idea how to respond properly. But they kept on it. They replaced the old V8 motors, V8 motors with new and improved versions. They put the AMG versions got an upgrade. The V12s finally got sorted out, so you could get a good V12 in it as well. I personally think they're very nice cars. In all honesty, if I couldn't get like an R129 in good condition, I'd probably go for one of these facelifted R230s. They don't reach the heights of maybe the R129, but they come fairly close actually. So I'll put them in the great category. And then the R231, um, out of the Mercedes SL generations I have driven, this is the only one I've driven. I've actually driven the SL63 AMG version of this with the big 5.4 liter twin turbo AMG V8 in it, and it's a hell of a thing. Like, I don't think it looks as nice as the facelifted R230s do, but it does manage to look appropriately, very much Mercedes and has a air of quality to it. The interiors, at least on the AMG models, are really fucking nice in them. You've got awesome quilted leather, you've got high solid plastics, you've got seats that respond and hug into you in the corners and respond to the dynamic handling. The thing has an IWC branded clock in the dashboard. That should kind of tell you what the quality you're expecting. It is a very high quality interior. That 5.4 liter, that 5.5 liter, 5.4, 5.5, whatever. Twin turbo V8 is a massive, massive monster. That thing, you put it in Sport Plus mode, it roars. It is so much fun, but it's also very quiet and sedate when you just want to use it as a cruiser. And despite you know having big AMG wheels and AMG suspension in it, it still is a very comfortable car. It rides exceptionally well in comfort mode, which again lends it to the fact that there is that it does kind of this dual cruiser sort of setup and does it very well. So they're solid cars, all things considered. I honestly, just from the dynamic perspective alone, I would put it in the great tier. It doesn't look as good as the facelifted R230s, but I think dynamically it makes up for it. So now we move on to the baby SLs, the SLK, starting with the first generation SLK. Yay, because of course the Germans needed a hairdresser's car as well. I, I know a lot of people are not too peachy keen on the first generation SLK series. You know, this was at the point when Mercedes did kind of start cheapening out things a little bit. You can see that. You know, the design of it, I think, is still very polarizing. You know, some people think, oh, it looks cute. It's managed to age very well. Some people are like, what the hell is that thing? God, it's ugly. You know, I mean, you did get some interesting options for it. You know, you could get it with a 6-speed manual. You know, you could get it with a. I think the one that everybody kind of likes from this generation is the SLK 32 with the big 3.2-liter supercharged V6 in it, um, which is the only acceptable V6 configuration, by the way. If you supercharge a V6, then I'm okay with that. Um, you know, dynamically, a lot of people are very split on it. Some people think it's a competent cruiser that manages to, and it can be fun to truck around. Some people feel it's a bit naff, as it were. Kind of a divisive reputation. I think for good reason, because this really was at the point when Mercedes was trying to experiment, and anytime you try to experiment, you're always gonna you either soar or you flop. It's just how it goes. I don't know how a lot of people in the car sphere, which I consider myself a car enthusiast, but I don't consider myself part of the inner car guy circle. I still I don't know how some people how people in general, or what the consensus is on the first gen SLK. Me personally, uh, it exists. That's all I can really say about it. You know, I probably couldn't fit in it just because it's really tiny. The styling doesn't appeal to me. The dynamics don't appeal to me because I just kind of look at the SLK in general and be like, why don't I just get an SL? You know, the SL's bigger. It comes with a V8 as standard. It is a great great Grand Tourer car. You know, I get that the SLK is meant to be more of a sports car per se, but I don't know if it hits it 100%. It's a very meh car to me. I don't hate it 100%. I'm not 100% sold on it either. Now we come to the second gen, the R171 SLK series, which I actually have driven twice. This was actually my first AMG car. G car is one of these SLKs. I drove a 2007 SLK 55 black. No, not black. But I did drive an SLK 55 AMG where it had the big 5.4-liter V8 under the hood that was cranking out like 350 horsepower. And I gotta say, when you put an engine that big that makes that much power in a car that small, it's a really fun car. It handles very well. It makes a lot of grunty power to it. The AMG styling touches I do kind of like more than the original SLK, but I also have my criticisms though. Like, for as expensive as a car was new, the interior is shockingly cheap inside. It suffers from the infamous, too many goddamn buttons syndrome that a lot of German cars at the time were suffering from. Um, there's not enough space in it, especially if you're big like me, and the ride is absolutely appalling on those things. It's stiff as a brick. Granted, I had mine in sport mode the entire time and didn't realize it was in sport mode, so that didn't help. But even switching over to comfort mode, the seats are way too stiff and the suspension doesn't have enough give for it to be a comfortable like cruiser car. And the fact that it only comes with the 7G Tronic automatic, which, like I said, isn't exactly the best for sporting applications. I get that those big AMG engines can't handle manual transmissions. At the same time, though, if you're gonna make it like a small sports car, put a manual in there. I don't care how big the engine is, but it did give me my first AMG taste to it, so I'm gonna say it's okay. Not what I can say for the SLK as a whole though, because the SLK is I don't care for it very much. I don't think the styling has aged very well. The interiors aren't the best. If you don't get it with the AMG versions, like I think I drove one with like the little inline four cylinder with the 5-speed automatic. It's not very exciting at all. Um, the ride is still kind of jittery and bouncy, but it doesn't have the tight handling to compensate for it. It's still not a very practical car. One of these, I think, with a 6-speed manual in it, I can imagine it being a somewhat decent, um, kind of sporty little micro cruiser, I guess. But I don't know. And again, it still suffers from being of the Mercedes era where everything felt kind of cheap and everything didn't feel screwed in, necessarily. I don't think they've aged all that well. In all honesty, I don't think they're good cars. So yep, gonna be right next to it. Actually, I would put it in the bad tier, but I can't be that cruel to it. I can be cruel to other Mercedes models, not that one though. And then we finally come to the final generation, the R172, which is the final generation of the SLK in general, or the SLC as it was called when it got renamed in 2016. Which I don't know why Mercedes decided to go with the renaming scheme, but yeah, I don't care for it. This version of the SLK is probably the one I would own if I had to, because once again the styling looks better. The interior has been much improved from the previous generation SLKs. I do want to say it's more comfortable than the original, while not sacrificing the handling prowess. I don't know. There is a little bit more practicality in there. Like, it looks like a car that I could probably fit in, being 6'4" or something, 4 or 5. You know, it's still not going to be the most practical car with a small trunk and still being a two-seater roadster, but at least it gives its objective. Um, I would put it in like the good category if it wasn't for the facelift slash refresh, because the facelift looks uglier in my opinion, and that was also the point when they got rid of the SLK 55 AMG and stopped putting the big V8s in there, and the only thing that you got to compensate for that was a 3-liter twin turbo V6, which, fuck you. It just can't compare. I'm sorry. In a car like this, a car that size, a big naturally aspirated V8, I think is infinitely better and infinitely more fun to get yourself in trouble in than a dinky little, twin turbo V6. And I'm sure the twin turbo makes more power than the V8 does. It's probably more economical and stuff like that. But that's not what you buy AMG cars for in the first place. You buy them because they are swiveling-eyed lunatic cars with big grunty motors in them that make stupid loads of power that you can't actually use. So if it wasn't for the facelift, I would easily put it in the good category. But because of the facelift, I'll put it in the okay tier. I would definitely own like the pre-facelift. I would definitely own 2012 to 2015 SLK 55 AMG, because I think those cars are actually very, very nice. I do like those cars a lot, but other than that, you know, not that much appeal to me, I would say. Next up, the basic ass Mercedes 190. And for any of you people complaining about the CLA, oh, Mercedes-Benz cheaping out. Oh man, why would you buy the Mercedes-Benz if you're buying a CLA. As valid as those criticisms are, the 190 was doing it back in the 80s, and I bet you anything there were a bunch of smug yuppie fucks who looked at the 190 like, wait a minute. Does that mean that the middle class can buy Mercedes-Benz? Oh, the horror! I'll lose my exclusivity! Oh, this is a dark day indeed! Um, you know, and I will say that the 190 is kind of the forebearer of everything wrong with Mercedes in some cases. They did keep putting in like the same quality that they put into the bigger models, but you can tell it was lessened. It's not like the cheap class that we have today where everything is just bottom of the barrel bargain basement, you know. That's a the Americans won't know the difference sort of mentality to it. At the same time though, I would hesitate to say that it's a true classic um Mercedes Benz of that time period. I mean, they still have all the Mercedes hallmarks to it. They've aged very well for themselves. They still have that Mercedes build quality to them in some instances. They're practical despite being cramped, and even if they are cramped on the inside, they've still got reliable engines. They've still got if you're willing to put up with the old car problems, they'll still do you good. But I don't know. I've never really respected the 190 to a certain degree. It is better than the entry level Mercedes Benzes we get today, no question about it. But at the same time, I also can't admonish it because it's still an entry level Mercedes Benz at the end of the day. So I probably am going to put it in the meh category. It doesn't inspire anything, but it also doesn't earn my like ire or something. And now we come to the 2.5 liter 190Es. We've got the Evolution models, the 2.3 and the 2.5 16 Cosworths, these Mad Lad cars. I mean, I do respect them to a degree. That 3 liter inline six is probably a very good engine indeed, and it is paired up with a proper 5-speed manual gearbox, so it's probably a really good like fuck around sports sedan to just be an absolute hooligan in. They haven't aged that bad, like I said, but for as much performance as it has to it, and as much of an icon as it is to it, let's be fair to ourselves here. It's still the cheapest Mercedes Benz you could get. It's still a basic bitch Mercedes Benz with with a big ass inline six shoved under the engine bay, making way too much horsepower, and a body kit that looks like it came straight out of Need for Speed Underground. Am I wrong in saying that? I personally don't think so. You know, and I guess it just takes more to build a good performance saloon. Like if you compare like the 190 Evolution Cosworth to the E30 M3 of the time, the you know it could probably beat it on power, certainly. But as far as the chassis handling and the dynamics of it all, I honestly don't think it'll even come close to that. Um, there's more to building a good sports sedan, even though I don't like sports sedans. But even I recognize that there's more to there's more to a good sports sedan than just taking a big high power engine, shoving it under the hood and putting like body kits and big wheels on it. There there's more of a science to it than than a lot of people I think understand and really kind of underestimate in to a degree. So again, I'm gonna put it in the okay category just for the sheer lunacy of it. But I'm personally not gonna say it's like one of Mercedes' best models in the world. No way. But let's move on to the cheap class, starting with the W202 cheap class. Um, really, it's a Mercedes-Benz cheap class. You know, you get basic engines that aren't very exciting to drive. You know, this was at the point when Mercedes was starting to cheapen out a bit, so you do get a lot of the pitfalls associated with it, like the biodegradable wiring and the water-based paint issues and electronics issues and some mechanical maladies and stuff like that. Uh, not there. I don't. I can't imagine they'd be exciting to drive. I can't imagine they'd be, you know, they would hold up well. I mean, you don't see a lot of these C classes around anymore, and if you do, they're all kind of beat down and just utterly thrashed and trashed. Really, I think the only thing that kind of saves the 202 C class from a lot of the others is that one, it still manages to look pretty good. Again, that sort of nice blend of traditional Mercedes styling with newer 90s aeroness to it. It looks recognizably like a Mercedes, and it actually has managed to age very well for itself. And two, you can get it with, you know, you can still get the early ones with an inline six. You know, they had the 2 liter supercharged inline four in it, which I've heard is actually not that bad of an engine for it. And you could get it with the 5.4 liter AMG V8 under the hood of it, which I have no idea how you would shove that son of a bitch under there. But even the C63 AMG with the 3.6 liter inline six in it that I want to say was supercharged. People in Mercedes says, correct me if I'm wrong. I want to say the 3.6 liter i6 for the C6 C36 AMG was supercharged, which again, you know, supercharged inline sixes are pretty awesome. So I guess just for those criteria alone, I will definitely put it in the okay category. Um, the 203 though. Ugh. So like, take everything I said about the uh, take all the positive qualities that I said about it and just remove them. You know, you had cheaper interiors, you had uglier styling, in my opinion. Again, this was still in the 4 round fried egg headlights kind of era of Mercedes Benz. You know, you could still get the 5.4 liter AMG V8 under the hood, but did it really redeem it? No. Um, Again, dynamically and mechanically, they haven't aged the best. Yeah, I'm honestly gonna say these are bad cars, and the estate version gets it as well. Um, because again, it's a compact estate. You know, if you're gonna get an estate car, you have to at least get a mid-size estate, in my opinion. A compact estate car, really, what's the point? Just get an SUV. But then we come across to the 204 C class, and I actually drove one once. Um, I want to say it was a 230, so it had like the basic I want to say it was either a 230 or a 250. No, it was a 250, so it had the 2.5 liter V6, which isn't the best powertrain that exists in the world, but it's fine for what it is. Definitely looks nicer than what came before it. Uh, the interior is somewhat improved all around. The build quality is definitely improved all around. Um, but at the end of the day, it wasn't anything special. Kind of a boring car, in all honesty. And the coupe version, you know, I'll put it in the meh category, and the only reason I'm putting it in meh is because it actually does look very sharp as a two door. The C63 AMG, on the other hand, though, Oh, that's insane. Again, I think I kind of put it in the same tier as the 190Es, where, it's just the biggest just a big shouty engine shoved under the bay with some boy racer styling touches to it. So I can't really say it's a good sports sedan, but my God, I imagine it'd be a fun car to just hoon around and be a be a be a plonker in. you know. And again, this generation of C class I think has aged very well from a styling perspective, so it does look very nice, especially in two door form. So yeah, I'll put it in the good category. It's not a very good sports sedan or sports car or whatever, but you know, you have to respect the lunacy. Now the 205 C class. Unfortunately, I've driven quite a lot of these for my job, mostly base model C300s with the 2-liter turbo inline four cylinder, aka the absolute worst engine configuration. Probably easily my least favorite engine configuration ever. Back in the day of like the 80s and stuff, turbo inline fours I've always respected just for being that is performance. But now with emission standards and everything, 2-liter inline fours are just what we have to deal with. It's the standard now, and I can't stand them because they're not very engaging to drive. Literally the only thing that they've got going for them is that they deliver good fuel economy, and that's it. I've always felt like they don't deliver good power. They're not exactly they don't feel super smooth with regards to the operation of how they run. Um, Again, really, the only thing that they've got is that they deliver good fuel economy numbers, and that's it. And unfortunately, with this generation of C class, there's a reason we call it the cheap class, and I can confirm the interior materials aren't very good in these at all. The styling looks really really bad. I don't know what it is with Mercedes' obsession with going with these SL inspired styling choices where you don't even get a hood ornament or a separate grille. They just do like the big Mercedes-Benz thing. Probably because West Taiwanese love it so much. Um, but that's neither here nor there. And otherwise, they're just boring. They don't handle the best. They don't have the best interiors. They don't look the best. They're comfortable, but at the same time, there are other more comfortable cars I can think of that offer a hell of a lot more bang for their buck. And really, why would you buy a base model C class Mercedes like this? Why would you buy a C300 when you can easily buy a V6 Japanese car for much less for the money? These I just hate these sort of like base model clout chaser cars from any luxury brand. Doesn't matter who it is. Cadillac ATS is kind of the same way with me. BMW 3 Series, Audi A4, um, all these sort of clout chaser cars where you're literally just buying the basest, most inferior version of it just for the badge. I can't abscond at all. They're just they're very overpriced in my opinion, and the two doors don't even look that good either. And now the new E class, or C class, I should say. Yeah, just take everything I said and just give it worse styling. Yeah, they might drive better. I doubt it though, because I've driven the predecessor, and I can't imagine there'd be like a um, massive improvement with regards to how they drive. So yeah, there's that. Next, we move on to the E class cars. I actually do know a bit about the E class. So this version right here isn't technically the E class. This is kind of a precursor to it, the W114, W115 um, series of vehicles. Uh, Again, the styling it's all right. It's not my favorite era. Again, it's from the '60s. Not my favorite era of Mercedes styling. I can understand why people enjoy it. Just not my cup of tea. This was the point when they had the um inline sixes in it for halfway decent performance, but they were still very heavy cars. So with the inline fours and especially with the diesel motors, again, this was before Mercedes really got into turbo diesels. They're really fucking slow. The interiors are pretty nice on. Interiors look very nice on them, and I'm sure they've held up beautifully. Don't know a whole lot dynamically. I imagine it's like driving around a big, heavy, solid chunk of lead at that point. But if I'm driving around in a big, solid chunk of lead, I want something with a more substantial engine under the hood, which outside of the higher end inline sixes, I don't think it offers. They're just kind of to me. They're very cars, so they kind of go into the category. The W123, its successor. I mean, everybody's seen these Mercedes Benzes at some point. I would argue that the W123 is probably the most iconic Mercedes of all time. It's easily the one that pops into a lot of people's heads when you say the words Mercedes Benz. Um, you know, they're fine. You know, again, the interiors have held up well. The stylings managed to age very gracefully. Again, over here in the U.S., we got butchered with the stupid round headlights and the big, ugly 5 mile per hour bumpers. But in the respect for them, they're very handsome cars. Again, the only good, powerful engine you can get is the straight six. A lot of these were sold over here with diesel motors that just could not cut the mustard. And really, the turbo diesel inline five is the only one worth getting if you're getting like an old diesel version of these. And I have to also kind of put into the context of when this came out, like the mid '70s and stuff. These cars were not cheap when they were brand new, as you might obviously gather. And, $15,000 or so back in, 1975, 76 for a base model diesel Mercedes with vinyl seats and not a lot of amenities to it. $15,000. You could easily go get a Cadillac or Lincoln or something similar that was fully loaded to the gills with a lot of amenities as standard, like AC, power locks, power windows, cruise control, leather seats, power seats, everything. You could get a big V8 motor in it that, okay, maybe it wasn't as efficient as the diesel, but it was a hell of a lot more powerful, both in the low end torque applications and even still with, you know, um, Malaise era smog technology, still probably a hell of a lot faster than the diesel Mercedes Benzes, you know, and you could get all of those like amenities for like 3 grand, 5 grand less than what a base model Mercedes costs you. Now I understand that back the Mercedes is going to be better built than Malaise era American stuff. It's going to have a better built interior than the Malaise stuff. Maybe not as nice looking, but it's going to be better built. It's it's gonna have that solid feel to it. It's gonna have more snub appeal if you give a shit about that sort of thing, which I don't understand why. Why? I mean, back in the '70s, I could understand it from the snob appeal standpoint, but again, for a lot of people, it's like, well, why would I spend $15,000 on a Mercedes Benz that can't even get up to 60 miles per hour? I can just go down and get myself a Coupe de Ville for like get yourself a big old 500 cubic inch V8 motor in it, and I can hit 60 just fine in that, and I can get leather seats and AC that actually works the shit. I mean, I gotta pay extra for that? Come on now. So, and again, I always kind of look at it very much in historical context and everything like that. But I also can't say that the 123 hasn't aged very well for itself, despite it not being the best with regards to modern traffic. I mean, okay, it's a 40-year-old car. You can't really expect. You can't turn up. There's only so many ways you could turn a Sausier into a purse before you just got to give up on it. But again, very well built, very solid cars that have managed to age very gracefully for themselves. And even if I do think that there could be something a bit better than a 3.2 liter inline six for decent performance, you know, decent performance, and definitely they could be more. I imagine they're not the most comfortable cars. I have heard a lot of people say they're very stiff cars, um, especially compared to the domestic competition. They handle better than the domestic competition, but again, handling prowess in a luxury car, I don't give a shit about that. But I still give it its due. Like the R107, it may not be my favorite Mercedes-Benz, but I give it its due. Very much so. Next up is the W124 series of E classes. Again, this was back before it was called the E class. Um, these are very solid cars as well. I honestly think these are better. They still look just as good as they did back then. Maybe doesn't have the same timeless look as the 123, but I still think they've aged very nicely. You could get a lot more powerful engine options. Turbo diesel options were across the board, so you could get good fuel economy and could still manage to merge into traffic. They very much have solid interiors with very chunky feeling buttons and solidity to it. The bodies are still very solid. Despite being very mid-sized kind of cars. You could get one with a 5-liter V8 under the hood towards the end of its life. That's got to count for something. Um, I have heard a lot of people say that this was like the absolute best car that Mercedes ever made. I don't know if I'd go that far into saying that it's one of the best cars that Mercedes ever made, but it's still a very good car nevertheless. Definitely one of the best. And now we move on to one of the worst. Oh, the 210E class. Basically, just take all the bitching that I've talked about with regards to that era of Mercedes-Benz, the ugly four-eyed headlight styling, the noticeably lesser quality both on the body and inside the interior, you know, teething issues all around dynamics that haven't aged the best and just applied there. I honestly think that the 210 genuinely is the car that damaged Mercedes' reputation for a long time, and who could blame them? I mean, there's a reason that these cars hold very little presence on the road. There's a reason you don't see a lot of them anymore. There's a reason they don't have the highest values there. They're garbage. They're not that good cars. I'm sorry. So yeah, both of these go into the terrible category. The 211, ugh. I mean, they did make more strides with the 211. You could get the big um, the big AMG V8s in there, uh, starting off more. You could get, and in fact, they worked out the teething issues as best as they can. I still think there's a little bit of lesser quality to them, inside and outside. The styling is somewhat better than the 210 is. I still don't care for it. I still don't think it's aged that well, but I will acknowledge compared to its immediate predecessor, it isn't as offensive to the eyes. And you still see a decent amount of these around everywhere, even if they may not have massive enthusiast potential. So they're they're boring cars. Both the wagon and the sedan, they're all right. They're not brilliant. Now, the 211 though, I can say is genuinely brilliant. I've actually driven two separate 211s now. Both of them surprisingly being enough the same spec, 350 BlueTech diesels. Because I was looking at one for a long time, but unfortunately, all the cheap ones have got like over 100,000 miles on them, and all the ones that are kind of lower mileage are either too far away from me, or they cost too much. Um, I wouldn't mind paying $15,000 for one of these with like, maybe 50,000 miles on the odometer, but 75,000 miles on the odometer, and you're asking like 18,000 for them. I think that's a bit steep, in my opinion. But I have driven these enough. But my time with them, I'll say they're very, 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 very good cars. Um, I honestly like the styling of the 211 quite a bit. I know some people are a bit iffy on it. I get that, but I'm okay. I'm talking pre-facelift W211s here, the pre-facelift versions, because that those are the ones I was looking at. The the pre 2014 uh, versions of it, But speaking from experience, I like how they look. I actually think they managed to age very well. They're very handsome cars. I know some people are not too keen on the headlight design. I actually don't mind it as much. I actually think it manages to give it some, or W212, I should say, some form of niceness to it, I suppose, if that's even a word. The interiors are very, very solid on them. There's a little bit of plasticky stuff in there, but it's good quality plastic. Leather seats. They're very comfortable cars. They still handle very decently. The Blue Tech diesel engines that I drove were actually very smooth. Um, for being diesel engines, they may not make the most power out there, but they're actually very quiet. They get very good fuel economy for themselves. I think EPA estimate 22 city, 33 highway. That's very, very, very solid for a car that size. Um, but you can also get like a big like the big 5.4 liter V8s under the hood of them without having to go to the AMG versions, and the 63 AMG exists if you want to be an absolute mad lad with regards to that. I actually think that they're very good cars. I actually think that these are probably the best E-Class versions ever, in my opinion. So I guess it really just comes down to styling. I'll put the sedan in S tier because I honestly do think it is probably one of the best cars I've ever driven. Certainly one of the best mid-size cars I've ever driven. I really do like everything about it. I would like to own like a Blue Tech sedan one day, or an E500 sedan if E550 sedan if I can find one, because I honestly do think they're good. The coupes, I'll put them in the great category. I think they look a bit awkward as two doors. I don't like the more SL styled grille to them. I think the normal grille in the sedan with the upright Mercedes-Benz star is a much cleaner look in my opinion. It works with the headlights better, but it's still solid mechanically. And the wagon versions I'm gonna put in the best category, just because I think it looks because I've seen better looking estate cars. I've seen worse looking estate cars. So it kind of falls into the middle for me. The extra practicality of the estate bumps it up over the coupe, in my opinion. But, you know, you can't go wrong with either of them. The facelift versions, I don't think look as good. I don't. Is that the? Yeah, these are the facelifted versions of it. Um, I wa- is it the facelifted versions, or are we moving on to the 213? I want to say no. That is confusing. I want to say I don't think the facelift versions look as good as the original versions do. I think the 2014 to 2016 facelift versions look very boring and not all that exciting. But you know what can you do? Next up, we're moving on to the 213 versions. I think they're little bit of a downgrade. Again, the obsession with the turbo four pot is alive and well. The V6 engines have never been my favorite, but I feel like they're better in the 213s than they are in the 212s. Um, the interiors are slightly nicer in the 213s. I don't think they look nearly as good though. Okay, the estate actually looks better, but but the sedans and the coupes, I think look lesser than the 212s do. And I think I've driven like two, maybe three of these 213s, and they're fine cars. They're just a bit anodyne in how they drive. You know, they're comfortable. The interiors are nice. They don't handle as well as the 212s do. They're not as exciting to drive as the 212s, which again, it's a Mercedes-Benz. It shouldn't be like enthusiast appeal or something like that, at least in my opinion. They're just kind of eh. Okay. So I'll put the estate in the okay category, but the coupes and the sedans are very kind of meh cars to me. The CLK, basically just two door E series. The original CLK, yeah, same problems that the W211 has, although I do think the two-door style works a little bit better with this styling than the four-door sedan and estate versions do. They're still not solid cars though. Um, and as for the CLK, as for the next generation of CLK, looks a bit better than the sedan and versions of the 211s. It does have a bit sharper to it. Again, there are improvements that Mercedes did kind of strive for in updating the build quality in the interior and everything. And you know, you can easily get the CLK 55s, 55 AMGs for performance, and you could get a V8 for added performance there. It's just not my kind of car. So I'll put it meh. I'll put it one above the 211s. Oh boy, now we get to talk about the S classes. Isn't that so exciting? Starting with the W116 version. It's all right. I know the 116 was kind of the genesis for the S class. In my opinion, you know, it's not my favorite. It looks very nice. Again, it's aged very well for itself. The interior is has the interiors hold up well on them. If you know, it does come with the 450 SEL 6.9 variant, which is a bit of a ridiculous bit of engineering, but that's way too costly to run. It uses the same like mineral based suspension setup that the 600 Grosser has, which if you know anything about that system, good luck. um it's a good solid car. I just think that there are better S classes to it, but it's also not the worst car ever in my opinion. It's actually managed to be well for itself, so it's a good car. It's good. It's not great, it's good. The 126 on the other hand, ooh, I like it. I mean the 126 S class I think needs no introduction. I think next to the 123 it, again is probably one of the most iconic Mercedes models everywhere. You know, there's a reason you see these particular S classes on the road even after all these years still being daily driven because they're just bulletproof fucking tanks that work exponentially well. They still look sharp today. Again, it's one of those cars where if you just plop it into the middle of showrooms, it would still sell well. And well, in my opinion, with a couple of added extras to it. You know, you've got a great list of engine options. You know, you've got inline six options. You've got the turbo diesel variants that actually aren't too bad. You know, the 420 SEL and the 500 SEL, the 560, all fantastic V8 motors that can last a long, long time, even if fuel economy isn't their strong suit. You know, there's again there the 126 is one of those cars, kind of like the 300 SL, where so many people before me who have proper experience with it can easily talk about these cars and the virtues that they have more effectively than I could. But I will regale one story that kind of demonstrates it. When I was at a car dealership looking at something, they actually had a 1990 420 SEL of this generation in the showroom, 140,000 miles on the odometer, and the interior still looked like it was showroom fresh. The leather held up well. The buttons held up well. Nothing was faded. Nothing was cracked. All the plastics were in good condition. I think that kind of tells you everything you need to know about Mercedes-Benz build quality and why they had that very braggadocious slogan of the best or nothing. And they really are the best. Hence why they're going in S tier. Um, the W140. Oh, I have to avoid being biased against the W140 because it is still one of my absolute dream cars. I still want to drive a W140. I still want to own a W140. It was my dream car when I was a kid. But in a historical context, there was a lot of criticism for the W140 when it came out. Nowadays we look back on it and very much revere it as the last over-engineered Mercedes-Benz, the one that still kept that solid traditional quality that Benz was known for, the one that like the end of an era ostensibly. But back when it was released, a lot of people gave it a lot of shit. It was too heavy, it was too bulky, it was too thirsty, it was too expensive, especially because it came out in 1992 when a really bad recession hit across the world. It was just the wrong car for the wrong time, and it got slagged for it. But as time has proven to us, it's managed to rise up, and a lot of people look on it fondly. You know, I will say this, objectively speaking, and this is just me being objective. This is not me being subjective. Objectively speaking, it doesn't look as good as the W126 does. Some people have criticized it for looking a bit too fat and a bit too porkish. I can easily understand where they're coming from. I personally think they've managed to age better, and again, it's one of those designs where as it ages more and more, you start to appreciate it more and more to a certain degree. But I can easily understand why some people would kind of look at it and be like, "Ooh, bit too, bit piggish there." I would say. But again, there's very little, if any, that can go wrong on this. Not a whole lot of major electrical problems for these. The build quality is still second to none on them. There is the big S600 V12, but like I said, with the R129, the 500 or even the 420 will easily serve you well and be less of a headache to keep running and less of a hassle on your wallet to fill up while still offering very good performance. Again, there's not a lot I can really say about the W140. The fact that I still want one after all these years is proof positive enough that it's managed to become a legend in its own right. A lot of people will look back fondly on it. A lot of people view it as the end of an era. It's managed to rise up from the shadow and become its own personal icon. Yeah, I'm definitely saying it's an S tier. Even personal biases aside, I still think it's just as good, if not better, than the 126 is. Which is more than I can say for this thing. I know there are some people who are gonna be like, "How dare you, sir?" I honestly hate the W220 a lot, and I do mean a lot. Because again, this was back in the time when Mercedes couldn't get its shit together. They started cheapening everything out, and when and if the C class or the E class gets cheapened out, fine. When the S class gets cheapened out, and when it's having rust proofing issues, when it's having aromatic air suspension issues on the higher trims, when it's having electrical faults, when it's having poor build quality issues, what the hell does that tell you about what was actually going on with regards to the with regards to Mercedes at that time. And honestly, I know some people think this has actually managed to age well for itself. It looks boring. It's generic. It looks like a generic NPC car I would see in a Grand Theft Auto game. There's nothing to it that draws your eye to it. It's anonymous. Which stealth wealth to a certain degree I get, but the S class is the best or nothing. And if I just look at it and be like, oh, that looks like a nice who's or what's it, That's a bad sign. In fact, this should tell you all you need to know. Right up my house, there used to be an Italian restaurant there that got replaced by an Italian restaurant that isn't nearly as good. But we used to order food from there all the time because it was really solid Italian food. I saw one of these 220 S classes being used as a delivery vehicle with like the placard and everything on it. That kind of says it all, really. That says everything you need to know about the 220 S class. It's just awful. It is one of only two S classes, and we'll get to the other one shortly. But it's one of two S classes I legitimately hate, and I could not see myself owning under any circumstances. But then again, I think like the early 2000s were like the dark days of German car manufacturing because you had the E65 BMW 7 Series, really anything from the Bangle Butt series. You had the mistakes that Mercedes was making, the mistakes Audi were making. The Porsche Cayenne came during that time period. Enough said. The Touareg. It was a bad time for the Germans. But the 221 S Class, which I have driven before, I like these S Classes quite a bit. Um, the styling is a bit polarizing. Some people really like it, some people don't. I like it. I can understand why people don't. The interiors are very solid, very nice. They still managed to hold up very well for themselves. You could get a lot of good engine options to it. The 5.4 liter V8 in the 2007 version that I drove, that's a solid motor, but the 4.7 bi-turbo V8s from like 2011, 2012, I want to say, are still very solid motors. I'll get more into that at a certain point. The V12s got finally sorted out, so you can get V12s, and of course you can get an AMG version V12 for this, which is just insane to me. They ride very well. Well, they ride well on 18-inch wheels, I think, because the one I rode had 19-inch wheels on it, and couldn't quite cope with some of the rougher stuff. So get 18-inch wheels. Don't get 20-inch wheels. That I although to be fair to me, that's my personal thing on anything. Like 18-inch wheels are just like the maximum I go to when it comes to wheel sizes. Anything beyond that, they're just gonna cause the suspension to fall apart at the seams because they can't cope with it. They're very but like I said, the right wheels are very comfortable. They still handle very well. They have gotten more reliable. There are still some electrical issues to it. The aromatic suspension is something you have to look out for. You could get a turbo diesel variant of it, that gets 31 miles to the gallon highway, which, you know, big personal limo that actually manages to deliver respectable fuel economy. That's pretty solid. Even if I do wish it didn't even if I do wish it came with rear-wheel drive instead of 4MATIC all-wheel drive all around, simply because with rear-wheel drive, I imagine it'd get better fuel economy numbers for it. Other than that, again, the 221 is a solid car. I'd easily put it in the best. Maybe not quite as good as the 140 and the 126, but still pretty solid. The 222 did drive one of these. Um, the I don't think it looks as good as the 221 does, but it has managed to grow on me to a certain extent. The interior super super nice inside. Rides very well for itself, handles very well for itself. The 4.7 liter V8 motor, twin turbo V8, and the 550s are solid motors. Again, very powerful when you want them to be, very smooth and quiet when you just want to use it as a luxury car. Not a whole lot wrong I can say about the 222s at all. They're excellent cars. I'd honestly say they're in the best. 223s? The 223, I think, to me is just like everything that I've grown to hate about modern day Mercedes. The styling, I honestly think is incredibly ugly. The interior, I'm sure the interior material qualities are best, but they're let down by this stupid insistence on the big fucking Tesla iPad style infotainment system, which I grow to despise all the time, every single day. Thank God it doesn't have a turbo 4-pot version in it, because then it would just be the absolute nadir of Mercedes-Benz. I do appreciate the fact that Mercedes is going back to straight six engines in their cars, and I imagine that the straight six engines in the new S Class are very solid. But just no, 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 no. Everything about the 223, I don't care for it personally. In fact, I just absolutely legitimately hate it. Like the 220, and I think they both kind of represent everything I kind of hate about the what I call the dark periods of Mercedes, where the 220 I hate because of all the quality issues associated with it, all the build quality faults associated with it, all the problems that it has with electricals and all its foibles, just because it was like the absolute nadir of Mercedes trying to cost cut to chase market profits because they couldn't keep building cars the way they did. And I mean, I get it. I get it. If they kept building cars like they did, they probably would have gone bankrupt a long time ago, because they would have generated more losses than they would have profits, just based on the astronomical price tags that would have occurred as well. But they went way too far in the other direction, and just the pervasive sense of cheapness that permeated that era of Mercedes, you can see in nearly any car that was designed between 1995 to 2005. So I hate the S Class because the fact that the standard class, literally that's what S Class means, Sonderklasse, special class, the standard, got hit with the same apathetic build quality issues that it did, that permeated all the other ones, that was like the absolute nadir of Mercedes. But the 223 represents what I hate about all these new guys trying to do it, because they look at Tesla with all the stupid bullshit tech that they've got in it, with the big obnoxious fuck off iPads that do anything and everything under the sun. So you have to go through some menu after some menu after some menu after some menu in order to do basic shit like change a radio station or change the fan speed on your AC or whatever. But you can watch Hulu while you drive, so I guess that makes it worth it. And it just it encapsulates the rot, the legitimate shallow tech bro rot that I see in modern day and not just modern day luxury vehicles, but just modern day cars in general, where it's all more about gigas and bleep bloops and looky loos and ooh, we got touchscreens everywhere, instead of actually building something that is going to fucking last, something that is going to be, you know, that's going to last for a long time. It's all just, well, it works during the warranty period. Fuck whoever decides to buy it. And I can't even lay blame on, like, governmental regulations or you know environmental regulations or stuff like that. I just lay it down to the fact that we as a society, we as a human species have de-evolved to the point where we somehow think that AI programs and computer programs and technology and everything should just make our lives easier, and that's all we should care about. It's just ease and convenience. If it wasn't for the antipathetic nature that we had today with regards to actually doing things ourselves and just having the robots do it for us, we wouldn't have stupid bullshit like fucking smart fridges. We wouldn't have a million fucking goddamn, subscription services all the time that are based on the whims of license holders. We wouldn't have cars that are basically rolling laptops with all the shit that can and will go wrong in the future and are basically meant to be disposable. We wouldn't have $1,000 fucking phones with batteries that only last 20 fucking minutes. And I know I sound like a Luddite, and I know I'm very much old man boomer, you kids get off my lawn, when I say this sort of thing. But Jesus H. Christ, it's true to a certain degree, don't you think? I personally think that I personally think that the meteor should fucking hit us sooner rather than later. But that's just doomer black pilled bullshit coming out of me. So don't listen to that part of it, But hey, what do I know? I guess rant over. Let's get back to talking about cars. Um, Starting with the S class coupe, kind of the predecessor to the CL class, and I do gotta say, yeah, it goes in S class. Because it does, again, it's just the W126, but it's in a very, very, very attractive two-door hardtop form. I miss two-door hardtops in cars. I miss two-door hardtops. They were awesome. Again, crash safety standards had to come in and with reinforcement and stuff, but man, you can't look at certain two-door hardtops and be like, I like it. So yeah, that's all I gotta say. It's just everything great about the W126, but it looks very swanky indeed. Not what I can say about the S-Class Coupe. I'll put it in the good category, and the only reason I'm putting it in the good category is because it's still the W140 chassis, and it still has all the good qualities of the W140 in it. I personally just think that the styling of the W140 does not translate well to uh, two-door coupe body style. It looks awkward and blobby, and whereas the W140 sedan has managed to age very gracefully for itself, I think the W140 coupe has kind of aged a bit like sour cream left behind a space heater. It doesn't look good. It's a good car. The styling though is just mm. Um, but now we get to the proper CL class. Again, I do kind of have my faults with it. You know, I do think it does look better than the 220 S class that it's trying to base off of. Does look nice from some angles. I will say it's probably the only Mercedes-Benz of that era that actually wears the four fried egg headlight look well for itself. Um, but again, just build quality issues, just you know, with stuff like that. I don't think it is as bad on the CL as it is elsewhere, but it's still something to look out for. The AMG versions kind of make up for it, though. You know what? I'll put in an okay. I'll be generous. I'll put in an okay. Next generation CL class. Basically, just take everything good that I said about the CL of that period, but add in much better looks, much better build quality, much better interiors, and solid engines all around. So I'd put it in good. It's not great though. It's again, it's a two-door coupe, so I guess the limitations of the two-door coupe do kind of bite it somewhere as far as practicality. Which again, if you're buying a two-door for for practicality, you're kind of you kind of are the reason that we put warning labels on shampoo bottles in the first place. But at the same time, you can't fault it for being a very. Actually, you know what? Let's move it up to great. I think it's aged very well for itself. And this is the. No, I think I want to say um. The S. No. CL. That's not the CLS. I want to say. No, that's the S Class Coupe. Sorry about that. Being a bit stupid here. The S Class Coupe, again, it's got all the good hallmarks of the 221. I don't think it looks as good as the sedan counterpart. Um, I can see why some people would think it looks nice. I personally think it looks a bit boring, but hey, you know, it's a good car still, regardless. The G Wagon. Now, I respect the original G Wagon. Just like I respect any off roader that was a legit off roader before we all became stupid. And the G Wagon original G-Wagon is a legit, honest to goodness off-roader. Sorry. You know, it may not be the most sophisticated thing on the road. It may not be the most livable thing to deal with. It may not have the most power, but goddamn, it's a workhorse. And for that, I easily respect it. And for that, I'm going to put it in the good category. I cannot say the same thing, though, about this hunk of shit. I am sorry to any G-Class stands out there. Okay? I truly, legitimately am sorry that I do not like your overgrown, overpriced Tonka toy on four wheels. But I have this thing called, you know, an opinion. It is an asshole opinion. I also have this thing called taste and functioning eyesight. I have never liked the G Class at all. Okay? Now, I am not a man who likes hatchback on stilt looking SUVs, as it were. I very much am a proponent of kind of the bigger, boxier um, SUV style. But there's just something so fundamentally repulsive about the modern day G Class. I just can't stand it. You know, is it the best looking car? No. I mean, it makes a statement, but I certainly would not certainly think it's very overrated. Does it handle all that well? No, it's very top heavy, just like all other SUVs. Does it ride well? Not really. Is the interior any good? No better than any other Mercedes-Benz models. Oh, but you could put the AMG V12 in it, which gives it more power than a Lamborghini Gallardo. In something that has the literal aerodynamic properties of a literal brick shithouse. Yes, yes. Keep telling me that your V12 fucking overpriced Jeep Wrangler Rubicon can out excel makes more power than a fucking Lambo. Okay? You can't handle as well as a Lambo. Your ass is going to tip over. You're not nearly as comfortable as a Lambo either. You don't have the practical despite having four doors and an actual usable space, you only manage to be better than the Lambo, marginally speaking. Can you take it off road? Not really. You know, you got big 21-inch drug dealer rims on it. You're not going off road, and then you're just gonna pop a tire. But like I guess that's like the core of it. It's just I don't expect vehicles to be smart. Sometimes I like stupid vehicles. Sometimes I like pointless vehicles. And I will easily acknowledge that. I have my biases just like everybody. But I seriously don't understand the appeal of that fucking thing. Literally, you are spending, $100,000 base price for a Jeep Wrangler Rubicon. That's all it is. It's a fancy Jeep Wrangler Rubicon with somewhat more powerful engine options and a better interior. Why? Just because it says Mercedes-Benz on the hood of it? But at least the Jeep Wrangler will actually do what it's designed to fucking do. It may not be a good off-road car, but that's not what it was built for. But with that, is it a good off-road car? Not really. It's got all the same problems that the Jeep Wrangler does. Is it a good off-road vehicle? You can't take that fucking thing off-road. Road what? With its 21-inch drug dealer wheels with rubber band low-profile tires on it? You seriously think you're gonna take that thing to Moab or something? Get real. The only bit of off-roading that thing's gonna do is hitting a curb outside the yoga mat to where the owner goes, or parking next to the grass field slightly when they take their kids to soccer practice or lacrosse, considering who buys these things in the first place. Like, it repulses me. It repulses me to an absurd degree the undeserved and idiotic popularity of the G-Wagon. It really, truly does. I can't stand it. No matter what, you will never convince me to like that car. And you know what? When we get to the other SUVs, which are easily coming up there, you may think I'm crazy where I put the rankings of the other SUVs there, but at least they're honest about what they actually do. It's one of the most the G-Wagon is one of the most pretentious vehicles sold today. And you know what? I'm putting the second gen right there as well. Two peas in a useless pod. Now, with the 6x6 version, it is a stupid, ridiculous vehicle, but I will put it in the overpriced category instead of the terrible category because it's still too expensive for what it is. I still think it's a bit too ridiculous, but you know what? At least it acknowledges the fact that it's nothing more than a fucking toy. It acknowledges the fact that it's a ludicrous proposal of a vehicle that is going to be bought by people with more money than sense, and it actually does have some off-road chops to it. And you know what? I respect that for it. It's a dumb vehicle. It costs too much, and I don't think it's worth the price that it was asking for. But at least it's honest. God damn it! And that's more than I can say for the G class, the modern G class anyway. In general, rant over. Ugh. I got real up and ornery there. I got real up and ornery there, boy. Actually, while we're on the subject of this, let's actually move on to the SUVs in general. First off, let's move on to the first generation ML. You may remember this from Lost World Jurassic Park, that terrible movie. And yep, yep. I liked the Lost World when I was a kid, and I liked the MLs in the car when I was a kid, in that film when I was a kid. Now, growing up, I realized the Lost World sucks, and so does the first gen ML. It, I think, along with the W210, which I know said kind of encapsulated everything that was wrong with Mercedes-Benz from like the mid '90s to the mid 2000s. The ML is also part of that as well. You know, again, it hasn't aged very well in the looks department. The build quality is terrible. The engine options aren't that great dynamically. Some people will swear up and down that they're actually good dynamically. I don't know how true that is, but they're like the absolute pits. I mean, there's a reason that generation of ML is called the Alabama trash can, because that's what it is. So, yeah, genuinely terrible. But the next generation of MLs, I actually like. I have driven these MLs once or twice before, um, for my old dealership job. Picked them up and from customers. They're actually good cars. They look a hell of a lot better. Again, the build quality and the interiors are much better on those than the older ones were. They are better dynamically for the most part. Again, they ride well, but they actually, can take a corner decently. Engine options are pretty solid. You can get AMG spec V8s in them. So they're actually, you know, they're good. They're not fantastic, but they're good. And that's all I can say. They genuinely surprise me with how competent they are. The third generation versions, I don't know. I mean, again, better interiors. The build quality is better. They do have more engine options in them. I think the styling isn't quite as good as the previous generation versions are. I think it's trying a bit too hard to look butch and macho and all that. But I'm not gonna say it's a bad car at all. It's okay. The newest MLs or GLEs, as it were. God, such a stupid fucking name this game they introduced. I don't like them. Look at these ugly, blobous little pieces of garbage. Probably not all that great dynamically either. Yeah, I think they're terrible. Um, the GLKs. Again, I actually drove one for my old job. Again, I don't think they're that bad. I mean, they're not as good as the MLs and the GLSs, but I think for if you compare it to the BMW X3 and the Audi Q3, it's easily the best out of all those little compact SUVs. But then again, if you're comparing anything to the BMW X3, it's anything's gonna look better than the fucking X3. That's a bar so goddamn low. That's been set so goddamn low that I'm surprised James Cameron hasn't found it on another one of his underwater expeditions. Like the X3 is just fucking hot garbage. But as for the GLK itself, I actually think it's managed to age very well for itself. Again, the interior has been improved, very comfortable. Not quite as much room or practicality as you might expect from an SUV, but it's still pretty okay. Um, as for these, I want to say that's the GLC, if I'm not mistaken. I can't even even come to grips or terms with it. So yeah, that looks to be the first gen GLC. It's alright. Wait, I can't tell, man. All these SUVs look the same to me. I can't figure out which one is which. Oh, ein Scheiße. Um, I'm just gonna say that's like the second the GLC. It's all right. You know, I'll put it in the same tier. I do think unlike the third gen uh GLC, it does look a little bit better. Again, still trying a bit too hard to be macho. Not a big fan, but it's all right. Don't have much to say about that. These coupe style SUVs though, yeah, they're just all gonna go in the overpriced category because that's what they are. Um, the GLA, driven one of these, pretty fucking atrocious. GLB, same thing. Yeah, the GLAs and the GLBs are just dumpster fire tier fucking SUVs. They're not good dynamically. Don't have good engine choices. They look ugly. The interiors aren't that well sorted out. They're terrible. The first gen GL class. Um, it's actually not that bad, all things considered. Um, I think again, you can tell that Mercedes did genuinely learn from the mistake of the first generation ML and put more R&D and development into it. So it looks better than the Alabama trash can. It's built better than the Alabama trash can. It's got a better interior, better engine options and everything. It's a bit anodyne for my taste, and honestly, if I were buying a big SUV in this category, I'd either probably go with a Range Rover or a Lincoln Navigator or maybe a Yukon. Hell, even a Lexus LX or Toyota Land Cruiser would be a better option. So it wouldn't be my first choice, but I also can't say it's necessarily a bad choice either. So I am going choice either. Um, I think this encapsulates the first and second generations, and I actually have driven the second generation versions of it. I actually drove one with the turbo diesel in it. Again, they're very competent cars, really smooth and comfy. Very solid interiors, lots of practicality to them for being big. I mean, they're big SUVs, so you'd expect practicality to be the norm. Solid vehicles all around, man. So I actually do have to say that they're good. Um, Second generation is kind of meh. There's probably more improvements in the engine department and stuff like that, but again, the doesn't look nearly as good as the originals did. The original ones may be a bit kind of generic looking, but they at least still kind of look handsome. This is again part of the whole trying way too fucking hard thing. I think we can move on to to the what else? Well, let's move on to the compact cars, shall we? Let's start with the A class. Oh, the infamous A class. The first generation A class is no question about it, probably one of the biggest embarrassments that Mercedes-Benz ever did. I mean, the first generation is infamous for rolling over in the elk test with like the high-speed maneuver thing, and it's like a test where they do the high-speed like swerve and avoid as fast as possible, and that motherfucker flipped over on the test and gave it a lot of bad PR. But really, outside of the fact that it's got the you know balancing properties of a drunken man at a Slipknot concert, it, it it's just I get that they're European only and that they're kind of meant to be like European only cars to be for like congested cities that are easy to park and everything, but I honestly can't fathom spending the money that these A classes probably cost new when you could get something that is bigger, bigger inside, more practical, just as small, has more power, is more fun to drive than the A classes. I honestly think like the first gen A class is like a black eye to Mercedes. Yep, and the terrible pile it goes. The second generation A class, meanwhile, is not here. Huh. Why would you have the first gen A class and then not the second gen A class? Doesn't that seem a bit weird to anybody else, or is that just me? Um, well, it looks like we had the third and fourth gen A classes. Well, they are better by virtue of the fact that they're newer. Other than that, though, again, it's kind of this thing of why would you spend X amount of money on a cheap Mercedes when you could get, something better with more options and more power and stuff like that from anywhere else. So, in the overpriced categories they go to. The CLA, I want to say these are the CLA classes. I drove the first generation one. It's pretty awful. Very mediocre car. Not very exciting to drive. Not a good interior. Not very comfortable. Not good handling. No good engine options. And again, kind of leads into the thing of why would you spend money on a cheap Mercedes when you can get, you know, a car that has a better engine and more amenities and everything for a bit more, other than fucking clout, which is always a great way to buy a car, presuming you don't mind living in a skip at some point. So, nah, it's bad. Not quite as terrible as the other ones that I've driven, but it's still pretty awful. And the second gen, I can't imagine that they've improved it much. So, yeah, there it goes. The CLS category. Uh, I'll be honest, I never really understood the point of the CLS, nor have I really understood the point of the four-door coupe thing in general. It's like, okay, you've got a four-door sedan with a really low roof line, so so you don't have the practicality and worse visibility of it, but it looks cooler, so you buy it. I've personally just never understood it. It's like one of those styling. If you buy a sedan, I think if you're gonna buy a sedan, in order to sacrifice four doors, you gotta sacrifice style just a little bit. And I think when you try to merge style and practicality, invariably one's going to be sacrificed for the other. And I don't mind sacrificing style for practicality in a two-door car, in a sports car, in a two-seater car, or anything that is meant to provide thrills or be stylish or any combination of things. But a practical four-door sedan, though, I never understood it. So I'm sure they're not bad dynamically. I just don't get the appeal of them. So I'm probably just gonna go off of styling because I just think they're all kind of meh in the first place. First gen gets boring because I don't like how it looks. The second gen gets meh because I actually do think it does look sharp, even though I still don't understand the appeal of it. And the third one gets overpriced. What do you want me to say? The R Class. Remember the time that Mercedes-Benz thought they could build a minivan and botched it so horribly that they never gave us one again? Pepperidge Farm remembers. I I don't understand the appeal of the R Class at all. Like, you know, it's a minivan. Minivans aren't meant to be cool. Minivans are meant to be practical. That's why you give up anything resembling cool factor for a minivan. And yes, I know the R63 AMG version exists. I don't understand it. I probably never will. I know some people like it because of its absurdity. To me, it just leaves me scratching my head. It doesn't leave me angry. I'm just kind of bemused by it, I should say. Um, you know, but I just like never understood the R class. It's like if we're going to build ourselves a minivan, are you gonna put sliding doors in it? Nine. Why would we do that? Are you gonna make it cheap? Nine. We are still Mercedes. You must pay for the experience. Are you going to? If you're going to ask another question about why we are making these decisions with the minivan, you will end up in the cooler. Okay. Um. Yeah. I. I. I don't get it myself. So yeah, I'm probably just gonna put him in the boring category because I don't know where else to put it. As for this Vanio thing, I mean it's a van. I can't really say a whole lot about it, but it's a friggin' van. The CLK GTR. I think that's a bit cheating to put like a race car in there, but hey, people are this guy's gonna do what he's gonna do. It's his tier list, and I certainly am not going to like bemuse or begrudge him for putting this in there. I mean, I know been a staple of racing games all the time, but really the CLK GTR has had a disastrous run. I mean, if any of you have ever seen that thing, the famous picture of that thing like fucking airborne doing a corkscrew barrel roll at Le Mans in 1997, you'd understand there that there was it's just yeah, because that's when Mercedes needed another disaster at Le Mans. You know, it wasn't like the last time that happened th- that that could have given a potential back quantities. No, sir, not at all. Um, so honestly, I have to put it in the overpriced category. It's not really even street legal. I can't exactly give it a fair compendium, even though I'm probably sure that they did make some homologated versions of it for public use. But at the same time, it's yeah, you can kind of tell I'm at a loss for words for it. The SLR McLaren. I liked the SLR McLaren when I was starting as a car enthusiast. Now though, I just think it's not that good in all honesty. I don't think it looks that good. I honestly think it's aged rather poorly for itself. It looks kind of ugly to be honest. It's far too compromised for what it's supposed to be. It's trying to be like a supercar, mid Grand Tour, mid whatever, and I just don't think that McLaren and Mercedes were on speaking terms to create a cohesive package. And the fact that they're still asking stupid amounts of money in the hands of private sellers, I'm just kind of like, why though? I mean, I get the rarity behind it, obviously, and I get the um the specialness that it has. At the same time, though, when you compare it to other cars of its decade, and really even other Mercedes performance cars, it just kind of seems like an ugly duckling. If you like the SLR, hey, cool, more power to you. I personally just think it's a bit overrated, and definitely overpriced considering what it's still asking for in this day and age in the year of our Lord 2023. The Mercedes SLS, I like it quite a bit. Um, it's aged really well for itself. Seems pretty fun to drive. It's an SL that a tall person can actually fit in. I mean, if Clarkson, my rule is if Jeremy Clarkson can fit into it, then so can I. So that's always a good thing. Lots of power to it. I think the only thing I really have to I think the only thing I really have to sort of denigrate it on is that it comes with a flappy paddle gearbox. I think if it had like a proper manual transmission, it'd be infinitely better. But other than that, I've got nothing bad to say about the SLS at all. So it's going in the best here. The electric version, on the other hand, nice experiment, but yeah, just kind of yeah. The AMG GT, yeah, I'm putting in the overpriced category. I mean, some people will say, "Oh, it's a better driver than the SLS is. It improves on the SLS's flaws. It makes it to be better. The gearbox is better. The power is better. It drives better, and all that." But I've just never liked how the SLS, not the SLS, the AMG GT looks. It's like you take everything about the SLS and just kind of, you know, lose it. It looks very generic, in all honesty. And it's not just because I got rid of the gold wing doors. It's also just the overall design looks very boring, I would say. Um, I know some people like it. I personally don't get it. But hey, more power to you if you do. The AMG GT sedan. I really don't understand the appeal of it. It's like a CLS that looks uglier and has a little bit more performance. Okay, I guess. And the GTR is kind of the same way. Ah, yes, the Mercedes 600 Grossa. As far as being like a car, the 600 Grosser is probably a very excellent car. Good solid engine. I've heard it's extremely comfortable. It actually handles pretty well for a car its size, surprisingly enough, which you wouldn't think, considering it's about the same size as a city block. Um, I guess the main concern I always have with it is, first of all, as far as like the 60s styling of Mercedes, I like this the best, but I'm not gonna say it still looks pretty. It's imposing to be certain. I certainly would not want to come across that in a dark alley. It does make a statement for itself, but at the same time, it does look a bit kind of, oh, okay. The other thing is just, yes, there's a lot of over-engineered technical application to it, but the fact that everything is hydraulically powered with like a special mineral that costs like $20,000 to fix in order to get it resolved, it just seems like overkill. Like there's a very fine line between over engineering and just overkill engineering. Like when you put like a special mineral fluid that that you know runs off of a 3000 psi system that operates the door locks and the boot and the trunk lid and the windows and the suspension and everything about it, that that to me seems very much a okay, you're just kind of doing this to show off. And it's just not very practical. And keep in mind, these cars weren't cheap back then. I mean, in 1963, that thing cost $20,000. 20,000 US dollars. You could buy 1,000 US dollars. 20,000 US dollars. A Cadillac Fleetwood Brougham cost $13,000 before extras. you know, and it really isn't any better than the Cadillac is. I guess it's built a little bit better than the Cadillac. It does have more exclusivity to it, but I don't know. The Cadillac won't bankrupt me even now, and I can get it for cheaper, and it probably makes better performance and probably rides just as good. So, I mean, I respect the 600 grosser for being like an absolutely good car. I just think it's a bit too Icarus reaching too close to the sun in terms of engineering design terms. But I will give it credit for taking the risks that it did. So I will put it in the great category, even though I think that an S class does everything that 600 grosser does and better, just not with that air of exclusivity. Maybachs. Yeah, I'm gonna put all these Maybachs in the overpriced category because they are. You know, like I can understand wanting to make a more prestigious S class than the S class, but there's a right way and a wrong way to go about it. It's like, let's resurrect ourselves a names that nobody outside of the Nazi era even remembers and cares about, and make it look vaguely like a Mercedes-Benz that has been, stretched out on the rack or in a taffy puller, and let us charge $250,000 for it, despite it not being any better than an S class. And when you consider the fact that the Rolls-Royce Phantom, the new BMW design Phantom came out at the same time, it's a stark difference between those two vehicles. Now, granted, I don't think the original 2003 Rolls-Royce Phantom 7 has aged all that well. I think it's very much a product of its time. I think the 2012 facelift that it got makes it look a lot better. But at the same time, the Rolls has presence to it. You don't mistake it for anything else. And it offers that luxury limo experience for the exact same price with, let's face it, the most prestigious nameplate one can think of. And you're going to expect people to buy a nameplate that hasn't been used in God knows how long, pay the same amount of money for a nameplate that nobody has heard or cared about, unless you're an absolute carboy like I am, for something that looks like a 600 Geneva taxi with a bit of chintz in the back. Let's be fair to ourselves here. The G Class Landaulet, again, I don't understand the appeal of it at all. The current Mercedes Maybach. Um, again, it still kind of falls into the same problem that the original Maybach did, but at least Mercedes is honest that it's a trim level for the S class and not just a you know its own separate mark. And at least they reflect that where it is basically an S class with a little bit more chintz in it. I don't think it looks that bad, and I think actually with a two-tone paint job, it kind of looks sharp from some angles. But at the same time, if you're asking me to be like, which would you rather have? This, a Bentley Continental Flying Spur, or Rolls Royce Ghost? I'm probably going to go with the Rolls and the Bentley first and foremost. I know the Maybach's probably infinitely cheaper than those two, but those two also make more of a statement, in my opinion. Um, the coupe I think that's the convertible version of the Maybach. I don't understand it. Um, the Maybach GLS. I have to admit, it's kind of growing on me just a little bit. I don't like any of these ultra luxury premium SUVs either. I definitely think compared to the Bentayga, it's not nearly as ugly. And for some people, it doesn't look nearly as ugly as the Rolls Royce Cullinan as well. Even though I am one of those weirdos that kind of likes how the Cullinan looks. Not saying I totally understand if people hate it. I personally don't. So I do kind of understand the appeal of it. At the same time, I have to ask myself, well, what's the point of these big, like ultra luxe SUVs in the first place? Well, just because people like SUVs, I get it, but I don't know, man. It's. I guess I'll just put it in the boring category because I don't hate it, but I can't like say it's fantastic either. Um, the new Maybach, I will say this: it does look better than the S class it's based off of. That's not saying a whole lot though, so I guess I'll just put it in the. No, I'll put it in the meh category as well. And all these electric cars. I don't like electric cars. I think they don't look as bad as what BMW's putting out as far as electric cars or Audi's putting out as far as electric cars. I still think they're pretty ugly though. And they are basically just Tesla chasers. And if you know what I think about Tesla, you know that I hate this. But I can't say it's like the pantheons of terrible. I think we have to let time really sort of settle in and let Father Time and his cruel, unrelenting hand to judge them first. So for now, I'm just gonna put him in bad. Um, but yeah, that's about it. I thought I would have more to say, but I did have what I wanted to say for the things that I did want to say about, I guess. So yeah, that's about it. I hope you liked this video. If you want to give me any tier list ideas, easily email me or put it in the comment section down below or what have you. Like this video, like it, give it a thumbs up, all that good shit. Um, but until next time, guys, thanks so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Take care, everyone. Stay safe, and yeah, that's all I really got. Take care. Bye.